South Africa, political economy of race relations, then population and society in West Asia, a demographic analysis, non-resident Indians entrepreneurs in the United Arab Emirates, Indian diaspora and transnational communities. His recent book, I don't know, it came already, Giants in India and Abroad. Then another he brought out, it's a edited book, that is on Indian diaspora and in West Asia, earlier. That is on anthology. He widely traveled and did fieldwork across Canada, South Africa, Barcelona, and so many other countries. So I think I'll end here. I don't want to start with the new and speaker. Now I invite Professor Jai to share the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sahu. Well, friends, it's a huge audience and a great opportunity to discuss the theme or some aspect at least of Indian diaspora for which we have been assembled here. And I hope we have distinguished panelists and three very good papers on which we will have a good discussion. Before I invite the panelists, let me briefly discuss about the diaspora or Indian diaspora. I am sure all of you are familiar with the term and meaning and relevant context of diaspora, Indian diaspora. Any migrant group which is living in another country for a number of years and they are properly organized as a community and keep maintaining relations with their motherland or homeland, that group we call diaspora. I mean, that is how I understand the diaspora. And with this background, so you can see all over the world globally, we have a large number of diasporic communities. I mean, as many diasporic communities probably as there are the number of countries in the world. So that situation is there. That means that invite our attention to multilingualism, multiculturalism, multi-ethnicity, and these are the values which we share when we have this diasporic activities going on. Now, coming to Indian diaspora, I personally believe that there was no diaspora as such in ancient and medieval period. That is why I understand. I mean, it was more a Indian cultural influence. When we talk of Southeast Asia, for example, or some of the countries of the Persian Gulf countries, and people were there, some traders were there, but they were mostly seasonal migrants. They used to go there and come back maybe in a year or maybe after 2 years, and that was the situation. And Indian culture and influence through teachings of various religions that were spread all over, for example, Southeast Asia or maybe part of Central Asia, part of what we call West Asia. So that I consider that much of this, these so-called diasporic activities in ancient and medieval period from India, they were confined to cultural influence as such. Indian diaspora, I think, started about maybe 200 years ago, when British, actively took interest and they forced other Indians to migrate to different parts of the world. You all know that in 1834 there was abolition of slavery and the Africans or Negroes in different parts of the world, they refused to work on plantation economies of the British, and therefore there was a need for labor. Now that labor was available from India, from China, and from other parts of the world, and that is how we started Indians going abroad under certain labor agreements. And these labor agreements, one can see is, for example, historically, one is called indentured labor system. As I study the Indian diaspora, I can see the 5 broad patterns of Indian migration abroad. Now the first pattern was this indentured labor migration, under which a contract used to be signed by an individual laborer with the government agent that he or she will go abroad to work maybe for 5 years, which can be renewed by another 5 years, and then at the end of these 10 years, if he or she wishes to come back to homeland or motherland, then she can do so, and appropriate facilities will be provided. But if they want to settle abroad, then they were given a piece of land, and that is how the Indian peasantry in the Caribbean, in Fiji, in South Africa, and other parts of the world that came. So this was the first migration pattern of Indians from abroad, which started at around the first half of the 19th century, exactly after 1834, because of abolition of slavery. Similar patterns. So out of this indentured labor system for migration, we have now Indians throughout the Caribbean, in Fiji, in Mauritius, in South Africa, and partly in Southeast Asia also, Malaysia, Singapore, Burma, and other places. So that was the first pattern. Now it's a matter of research. As all of you know, Hugh Tinker has done a classical work on this new system of slavery, what he calls. That means indentured labor system. So that was the first one. There are many other details as to who migrated and from which part of India people migrated. So under indentured system, most of the migrants were from what we call now Eastern UP and Bihar, these areas, or Chota Nagpur area, from where many tribal people they migrated. Also people migrated from partly Tamil Nadu under indentured system. So that was one. Second system was what we call Kangni or Mestri system, which was prevalent in South India, particularly in Tamil Nadu, and this was operative in Southeast Asia, again Malaysia, Singapore, or Burma, the old name, or what we call currently Myanmar. So Indians migrated under this system from Tamil Nadu to these countries. Now what was the difference between indentured labor and this Kangni or Mestri system? Here it was different. There it was an individual recruitment in case of indentured labor. But in case of Kangni migration, it was sometimes the whole family, the whole village, or the whole caste that they used to migrate. At once money used to be paid to these people, and obviously then they were under obligation to migrate, and they worked on different kinds of plantations, again owned by British or other people. And that is how we have another kind of labor migration, particularly to Southeast Asia, and that is how we have this system. Now third form of labor, not labor exactly migration, but manpower migration, we can say, was the migration of trading castes and classes. And this migration occurred in Gujarat particularly. And from Gujarat, these people migrated to East Africa and South Africa, and partly to Fiji also. So under this system, traders migrated, and some professionals like teachers, lawyers, and office workers, these kind of people, they migrated. So, and I'm sure you must be knowing that Mahatma Gandhi also migrated under this system. which is called free or passage migration. Free or passage, that means that you don't have to seek permission of any government authority. You can buy your ticket and then you can go to that particular country. Obviously certain restrictions were there, but normally many British colonies were open to this kind of migration. Because people were needed there also. I mean, there were no teachers, there were no doctors or lawyers, and that's why they were allowed to migrate in these countries. So that was the third form of Indian migration historically. Now all these three migration patterns, they happened during British period, colonial period. So we have these three patterns. Now after independence of India, we have two more type of migrations, and these are, that one is called, I call brain drain type. So educated professionals, they migrated from India to different parts of the world, particularly to England, to America, to Canada, and now obviously Australia, New Zealand, and many other parts of the world. So that is how we have. Earlier, why this brain drain? Because earlier people thought that this is a drain on India, in the sense that educated people are leaving India and they are not coming back. You spend lots of money on them and that is going waste. So in that sense, that's what. But after 1990, the same migration pattern is considered brain gain, or you can say brain circulation, because many of these people, they are settled there, and when they want, they also come back if they think that India is a better place to work and live. So that kind of thing is happening. So this circulation of educated people, that is happening in a big way from India after independence, and particularly these days. Then final pattern of migration I call migration to Gulf countries of all manpower. You say, laborers, it's educated people, professionals, traders, entrepreneurs, all kind of people are going there in Gulf countries, particularly Persian Gulf countries, or what we call Arab Gulf countries. The difference between brain drain and Arab Gulf country migration is that here in Gulf countries, Indians are not allowed to become permanent citizen. Naturalization of citizenship is not available to them in these countries, and that is how it is different from the brain drain type migration which we described earlier. So basically I think, these are the 5 patterns of migration under which Indians migrated to different parts of the world, and we have an Indian diaspora. Now how strong is Indian diaspora in terms of population? Well, there are many, guesses, and I place this 30 million plus at least. It also depends whether you consider Nepal as a diasporic country, or whether you consider Ceylon, Sri Lanka as a diasporic country. If you see the Government of India's report, 2001 report, which is a major report on Indian diaspora all over the world, then they don't consider Sri Lanka, for example, as a diasporic country. Maybe some political regions are there. Similarly, they also don't consider Nepal as a diasporic country, and that is why the number of people mentioned there belonging to Indian diaspora, that is much smaller. But when you include these two countries, then it certainly becomes more than that, maybe around more than 30 million. Maybe. So that is a kind of thing. Now all of India is being represented in diasporic country, all castes, all communities, all religions, these are there as part of Indian diaspora. And as you will see or listen in our papers, you will find that these diasporic Indians, they are maintaining very good connection with India. Obviously that is by definition, that is supposed to be. If you are not maintaining your connection with the homeland, then you are not a diasporic group. So, by definition it is important. Otherwise you are considered to be, if you lost your identity in another country, then obviously you are assimilated or you are integrated into that country, but you don't have any sentimental or material links with your homeland. So that way, that group will not be called diaspora. Anyway, so Indians all over the world, they are maintaining very good relations. They are trying to develop India. They are trying to contribute monetarily and from other perspectives, and that kind of diasporic activities are going on. So friends, with these few remarks, I invite the first presenter of this panel, and she will be, this is Shipra UK, right? Okay. And she will be reading a paper on Hindu nationalism, identity and marginalization in Indian diasporic literature in the US. Shipra UK, please.